People are still coming in.
Recording has started.
Thanks, Marie. Okay, we'll give it another minute or so as people are still flowing in, and then we'll get started. For those who have just hopped on, welcome to our Community of Practice call. Feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. Let us know where you're calling from, and we're going to get started in a couple of minutes. All right, it seems like it's slowing down a little bit, so maybe we'll get started and then people can catch up as they're joining the call. Just a reminder for folks, please mute yourself, just so that we're not getting background noise and that we can have full attention to our presenters. You'll have lots of time to unmute yourself during the question period when you want to ask questions to our presenters. So thanks for that in advance. Okay, everyone, welcome to our Community of Practice call. My name is Ashley Vandermark. I use pronouns she and her, and I am thrilled to be your moderator today for our call. And I'm even more thrilled that we have a group from Peterborough joining us to talk about their bridge housing project that was launched in November 2023. Before we begin, we want to spend some time and acknowledge the land that we are calling in from and the impact of that land. And I would encourage each of you to put your own land acknowledgements in the chat. The Canadian Alliance to End Homelessness is committed to equity, dignity, and justice and belonging. As Indigenous people are massively overrepresented in homeless populations across Canada, we recognize the historic and ongoing impacts of colonization, and we are committed to the decolonization of systems and ongoing reconciliation. I acknowledge that I am a settler calling in from a land that I both work and play on, and that is the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, the Adirondack, Miamia, Mississauga, and the Wyandot. This land is part of the McKee Treaty II of 1790 and is colonially known as Bell River, Ontario, which is just outside of Windsor. Again, I would invite you to share your own acknowledgements in the chat and reflect on this as we move through the content today. Okay, so our call today, we are spending a little bit of time doing welcoming, and then the bulk of our time is going to be listening to our friends from Peterborough as they talk about their bridge housing project, the learnings, what they've accomplished, and next steps in terms of housing. And then we're going to have lots of opportunity for you to ask questions, share some discussion, and possibly for the team also to ask questions of you and get your feedback. And then we will do a quick wrap up. We have scheduled an hour and a half for this call. It might go that long depending on how many questions you have, or we might be ending a little bit early. So it will depend on how many questions we have coming through. Just a few housekeeping notes for this call. As a reminder, we do record all of our Community of Practice calls. The recording and the PDF of the slides will be linked into our Built for Zero Canada website and will be shared out next week. So you will have access to all of the slides that Peterborough is sharing and the links that are included. And again, we're just asking that you put your questions in the chat during the presentation, and then we'll go through a Q&A period after that for the folks to answer your questions. So where to find the COP call? So if you're looking for any previous calls that we've held or where this one will be held, you're looking on the by name list web page, drop down under resources. And then you're going to go to how to create and use a by name list. And then you're going to see all of the different COP calls that we have done. One's going back a couple years, pre-recorded webinars that are detailing steps to start a by name list, and then also COP calls from various years that we've held. So please go through. There's a lot of great information and a lot of communities that have shared incredible experiences and bright spots in their journeys. You may be wondering, are we going to continue doing Community of Practice calls? We are. So this is a plug to stay tuned. We are currently in the process of finalizing what the topics are going to be based on the feedback that you've given us of what you really want to talk about. So stay tuned. And those will be posted in the newsletter, but they will be continuing monthly starting in May. And as a reminder, if anyone on this call is not connected to the newsletter, please sign up for our newsletter. This is a chance to stay connected with what's happening in the movement. resources and bright spots from other communities. And Marie, I believe, is going to throw the link in the chat, and that's the link for you to sign up.
So sorry, we're just on a video.
Thank you. We got a mute there. But hello, Julie, welcome to the call. Okay, a reminder that we have some BNL by name list and coordinated access series online courses. And so this is a list of courses that have been created and are available to you, including the time and also the key, the passcode in order to access those. These are great resources, especially for folks who are just starting out and want an intro into what a by name list is, what by name data is, what coordinated access is, and the different components and elements. If you have new staff, this would be a great opportunity for them to learn about the basics and the fundamentals, and it doesn't require you to resource that training. And so please use these trainings and give us some feedback as you're going through them if there's things that you think we could do to improve. Okay, enough of me talking. Let's skip to the real reason why you are all here. Peterborough is garnering attention both provincially and across the country for their 50-unit bridge housing community located on the city property that was originally the location of an encampment. And I know you are doing a more fulsome introduction as part of your presentation, so I will just say that I am thrilled to introduce Debbie Carrier Robinson, who is with Elizabeth Fry Society of Peterborough. We have Jocelyn Blasey with the City of Peterborough, and then we have Jessica Penner with us as well, with the City of Peterborough joining us today. I know there's others on the call from the City of Peterborough and a couple that might be speaking, but I will leave the team to introduce them as they come up. So without further ado, I am going to turn it over to you folks.
Thanks, Ashley. We're really excited to be here today. Thanks to everyone joining and for having us. Next slide, please. We just want to start out with a land acknowledgement from where we're situated here in Peterborough. We want to acknowledge that we are located on the Treaty 20 Mississauga territory in the traditional territory of the Mississauga and the Chippewa Nations, collectively known as the Williams Treaty First Nations, which include Curve Lake, Hiawatha, Alderville, Scugog Island, Rama, Beausoleil, and Georgina Island First Nations. We respectfully acknowledge that the Williams Treaty First Nations are stewards and caretakers of these lands and the waters in perpetuity. Oh my goodness. And they continue to maintain this responsibility to ensure their health and integrity for generations to come, and that we are all treaty people. Next slide. So we're going to start out with introductions. We're going to be sharing the presentation between the three of us. Debbie, do you want to start out with your introduction? Yes.
Hey, I'm muted, not a good start. Okay. Hi, I'm Debbie, the Executive Director of the Fry Society of Peterborough. I oversee the operations of the site, all the services that are Elizabeth Fry. So we are both the site operator and the service provider. And that also includes primary responsibility for communicating with the city on all aspects of the grant. So I will back to you, Jocelyn and Jess.
I'm just going to jump in and just remind.
Oh dear, I think you're muted, Ashley.
I was just telling everyone to stay muted, and I just kept myself muted. just a reminder, folks, please stay muted so that we can hear the presenters as they're talking. There'll be lots of time for us to ask questions at the end of the presentation. Back to you.
And hi, everyone. I'm Jocelyn Blasey. I'm the Homelessness and Data Program Manager with Social Services with the City of Peterborough.
And I'm Jessica Penner, and I'm the Project Manager for the Modular Housing Community from the city side, helping to support the success and making sure that we're integrated in city processes. I also want to acknowledge there are a few other folks in the room who supported this project and who are also available for questions at the end if your question is more relevant to those roles. So we have two of our city councillors who were heavily involved in the processes, Councillor Burke and Councillor Riel. They're also going to be speaking for a slide or two. We've got our Commissioner of Community Services, Sheldon Laidman, and then we've also got our Director of Social Services, Rebecca Morgan-Quinn. Next slide, please. So today we're really taking you through the whole process that we went through. We've been getting many questions from maybe some of you in the room, but certainly communities across Ontario, but also the country. And so we tried to design this presentation according to those questions and some of the key learnings that we've had that I think we would have loved to hear about before we started out on this journey. So here's the overview. We'll be working through each of those topics. Next slide, please. And this is the first time we're showing this video. It's newly created and it gives a visual overview as well as a brief introduction to the project. This will be available on our website. It's not quite yet posted because it's just finished. So it's about 5 minutes and we'll start out with this video.
The city of Peterborough, like many communities across Canada and throughout North America, is responding to homelessness and working on innovative approaches to help people in our communities. Peterborough provides a shelter system in partnership with several community agencies, including a new building for the Brock Mission Men's Shelter that opened in 2021. Recognizing the unique needs of many community members, the city is committed to exploring and investing in new options for the current system. In May 2023, City Council approved an enhanced homelessness services plan supported by additional provincial funding. The plan included a new winter overnight drop-in space to complement the existing emergency shelter network, as well as a new initiative for Peterborough, 50 modular units for people experiencing homelessness to provide shelter, access to food, connections to services, stability, a home, and a community.
The Wolf Street Modular Community is located in downtown Peterborough. It's on a city-operated lot, so we're able to quickly move forward with building the units and putting the community in place as quickly as possible. In addition to that, it's centrally located downtown, which means that clients are easily able to access a variety of different services and supports within walking distance. Move-in for clients and residents into the modular community was in November 2023.
The city was able to build the modular unit community and fund a site operator by using a portion of the new increase of $2.5 million in annual funding from the Provincial Homelessness Prevention Program. The site is operated by Elizabeth Fry Society on behalf of the city, and partnerships with community agencies provide 24/7 support services for the residents.
Each modular unit has some furnishings. That includes a bed, a mini fridge, a side table, and individuals were able to pick their own additional furniture to make it feel more like their own home. They're all controlled with their own air conditioning and heat. There's a smoke detector and fire safety protection in each of the units as well. There's also a keypad lock so individuals can feel that sense of security and lock their belongings. And around the site there's fencing, which provides security and safety for both the neighborhood but also the residents who are on site to make sure that they feel safe and comfortable at their new units. So security is on site 24/7 to support the safety of, again, the residents on site and also the neighborhood. The washroom facility is a separate building. There's 5 washrooms. One is accessible in terms of radius because we do have some clients who have accessibility needs. And each washroom facility has a shower, a sink, a mirror, and a toilet. Selection for the units was individuals who had been outside in the encampment, but it was done with social services and in conjunction with community partners, using a priority matrix to ensure that the individuals who needed the units the most would be put forward for those units. Every individual who has a unit has to pay rent. That comes out of their Ontario work, so their ODSP, Ontario Disability Shelter Allowance, shelter portion, or if they aren't receiving social assistance through a rent geared to income calculation.
The city is also converting a former municipal office building next to the property into a communal space and service hub. The modular bridge housing community is more than the individual modular units. A community has formed.
So social services has worked with a consultant company to set up a neighborhood liaison committee to have neighbors provide input and support the transition of the modular units in the community. And what we're hearing from residents on that committee and through the community as well is that it's a tidier, quieter, and safer community than it was a few months ago before the units were put in place.
The modular bridge housing community is not the solution for homelessness, but it is another option for providing shelter, stability, and a home for people who are experiencing homelessness.
Every individual has their own unique needs. Some individuals will be able to move on fairly quickly, and for others it will take a bit of a longer time. But this project allows us that time and that opportunity to stabilize folks and figure out what the best option is for them when they are ready to move on. So the mental health changes have been incredibly significant for folks. They're able to not be in crisis all the time, not worry about where they're going to eat, where they're going to sleep, worry about the elements. So they're able to find time to sleep and have that safety and sense of security, lock their belongings behind their own door, and be engaged with case management and supports, both on-site but in the community.
Housing, including a range of supportive housing for a variety of needs, is the solution for homelessness. Modular bridge housing may be an option until we get there.
We're seeing the results of what it looks like when you're able to provide someone a home.
All right, thanks, Ashley. If you can go to the next slide. Sorry, I don't know if anyone noticed, I kind of skirted out of the way. It's always a bit strange to see yourself on video. Just a bit of a weird feeling. Anyway, so thanks everyone for letting us
I know what it is, Josh.
Thanks, Alex. I think we just wanted to take the opportunity just to provide a bit of a visual of the site before we kind of provide some more information about the project and how we work through those steps, just so we're all kind of starting from the same place. So in terms of our project timeline, in short, it was quick. In 2022, we had homelessness declared a state of emergency by council, and we had a significant encampment at what we call Wolf Street on a municipal parking lot in our community. And in March 2023, we had an increase in HPP, or homelessness prevention funding. And we saw that as an opportunity to try something different and innovative to support the people who were staying at the encampment at Wolf Street. I do also want to acknowledge the City of Waterloo, because we'd heard about their Herbs Road project, and they provided us a lot of support through the initial stages of this as we were trying to work through this. And so with that increase in provincial funding, we were able to look at our data and consult with community partners about the potential of a modular unit project, recognizing that we would need their support and we would need an agency to operate the project. We wouldn't be able to do this on our own. And so we did something a bit unusual. We presented what we call a concept plan for the modular projects in May 2023, where we're able to use data to demonstrate the need in the community for something different, for a project that would provide a place for individuals who had higher acuity, and for individuals who either couldn't or weren't able to access our traditional kind of shelter system, or had been through all of our other housing programs in the community. And this concept report approval from council gave staff the authority to work on a design and develop and install the modular project. If we hadn't been able to get that concept report approved, it would have taken us a lot of time to figure out all the details. So this really gave us the flexibility to design the project as we were working through it. And with this report approval, it also approved having the project at Wolf Street, which is in downtown Peterborough and on a municipal parking lot. Just in terms of some key things about this project, both pros and cons is we were building the project on the site where the existing encampment was. And so in terms of pros, it did provide us the opportunity in terms of knowing where folks in the community were who were experiencing homelessness, who are likely going to be prioritized for these units. So it was easily, our outreach teams were easily able to connect with these folks and build relationships with them in the community. But on the flip side of that, we weren't able to start construction without having a different place for folks to move to, which presents a different challenge. You're not just building the units, you're now having to figure out how to support an encampment relocation as well, just to add another layer of complexity. And so we received approval to create a temporary sanctioned encampment, which was actually on a municipal parking lot right across the street, which enabled folks to move to not too far. We were able to support that process. And folks moved into that site on September 2023. Just in terms of that, just in terms of if you are looking at doing a project like this, staying in contact with your construction folks is really important. If we hadn't been able to start construction in September 2023, the units weren't going to be ready until this spring. So it did kind of play into our timelines and our deadlines as well in terms of project planning. And then, like I said, construction started in September, and in the end of November, residents moved into their units. So from the time we had council approval, the end of May, until folks moved into their units, it was about a 6-month process. Next slide, please, Ashley. And Councillor Riel, Councillor Burke, I might ask you to talk a few pieces on this slide, if that's okay, just around the relationship with City Council and staff.
Keith Riel, City Councilor for Ashburn, Ward 4, City of Peterborough, Chair of Housing and Homeless. The City of Peterborough, I want to welcome everybody here today, certainly for this presentation. If it wasn't for a couple of things, certainly the funding that we got from the provincial government for our MPP, Dave Smith, and a shout out to him. But a mayor that knew that he was going to take it on the chin, and certainly a council that had the fortitude to move this project forward, we wouldn't be where we were today. We would be probably in the same state as a lot of the municipalities, and certainly what's happening across the province of Ontario and Canada with the tending situation. So we had a buy-in from our council, and certainly the money that we got from the provincial government, plus the money that we had in our housing and homeless, give us the leg up to do this here and to move people. And you looked at the time frame here from the date in May till November, we had 99% occupancy. That is unheard of anywhere in housing to have a 99% occupancy. So we're very proud of the project we have. This is transitional housing. We need both levels of government, both the federal and provincial government, to get us the housing that we need as we move these people out of homelessness, stabilize them, but then move them into probably the forever home, which we're working on right now. We have some successes that have happened at Wolf Street. To date, 4 people have found full-time employment. A number of people have offered themselves to go to treatment to get out of the addiction. And certainly if it wasn't for our partnership with our agencies and helping to work with these people, the success that we're seeing at Wolf Street, and you need that. You need wraparound services, not only from here, but going forward. So thank you very much for joining us today, and I'll turn it over to my counterpart, Councillor Burke.
Thank you, Keith. Hi, everybody. A little bit weird talking to a picture of us 3, but that's okay. I just want to say I don't really have anything to add as much as like to echo what Keith said, and just really grateful for everyone's attendance and interest. And I'm just sort of smiling because of just reflecting on the project and like the slides versus like the experience of what we were going through for each of those steps on the project was very interesting. I'm the vice chair of housing and homelessness with Keith. I'm a city councilor for downtown Peterborough and I have lived experience. And it's funny, in all the people that have been reaching out, they're very interested on like the modulars themselves, but like I don't know anything about that at all. And what I do know is that I feel the success of this project is by the fact that we met people where they were at, And, you know, Jocelyn's talked about identifying the need. And what we saw was that there is a need for supportive housing, right? We were taking people from homelessness and putting them into situations with no support, and it was creating this cycle of chronic homelessness. And so this isn't a solution, but it's like it's a tool within the housing continuum that is definitely meeting a need. And the other thing is that a lot of the proposals we were getting were wanting to like have these sites without the support, or have these sites like outside of town or on the edge of town. And, you know, I believe that the project was successful in that occupancy rate because, like I said before, we met people where they were at. And yeah, and also just, you know, we had this project represents a huge cross collaboration between all city departments, and we definitely had the support of the city behind us in planning and all these ways that was really beneficial for us moving so quickly. So yeah, thank you. Nice to see everyone. And you know, Keith Riel, who spoke, he's been really amazing, and we're both wired the same, where we're just like energy and go go go. And when this was approved, Jocelyn and Sheldon were basically said, because the concept was approved in May, and they said now we have like 1,000,001 things to sort out. And it's been really fun to have been involved in sorting all that stuff out with Keith and with Jocelyn and Jessica and Sheldon, and it's been extremely challenging. There's been like 1,000,000 project management details that probably no one will see, but were things that I think we've learned a lot from the process. So thank you. Sorry for rambling.
Thanks, Councillor Burke. Thanks, Councillor Riel, for that. Ashley, if you can go to the next slide. So just to add on to what Alex said, in terms of city staffing resources, especially in terms of our timeline, that's the only reason I would say we were able to achieve the success in reaching that timeline. If you're thinking about taking on a project like this, or if there's an organization in your community that is, this is just a small snapshot of all the different departments that were connected. And I also want to acknowledge that they reprioritized their entire summer to support this project and making sure it was successful. And we had a lot of support from senior admin and heads of departments to be able to support the project and support their staff reprioritizing their time to see the project be as successful as it was. We had lots of weekly meetings with our commissioner to get his support on moving different pieces along and figure out different steps at different phases of the plan. Communications department was key. There's lots of media attention both before the project started, but definitely during and now. And so their support around key messaging. And the other piece of, I think, advice I'd give is hire a project manager or two if you can afford it. It's a really large endeavor to take on. We were really lucky to have the building division who redeployed staff to just manage the construction pieces. I'm not a construction expert. I couldn't tell you anything about the things that are required for that. And they were really able to take that piece of the project on and use their skills and expertise and connections within all the different departments to ensure that the construction piece was moving ahead. And then we were able to hire Jessica as a project manager to really focus on the programming and supporting the encampment relocation and all the other pieces attached. And so I would just, it's not something you can do on the side of the desk. And if you're going to do this, I would really invest in the appropriate resources to make sure it can succeed.
Next slide, please. And in fact, just to build on that, because that's my role, even now that we're 5-6 months after opening, there is still a significant amount of time and energy that goes into ensuring that we're doing this right as we tweak what we do and as we deal with damages, as we talk about moving forward with selection, as we talk about how to move people off the site into more permanent housing. There are the project doesn't end when you pass it over to the site operator. So just, I know we already said this in the video, but there are 50 total homes, and then there's the one shower bathroom unit, which has 5 stalls in it. Each one is equipped with the toilet and a shower. Each one is 107 square feet with its own heating, air conditioning, and electricity. There is no water to each unit. On site, we have 24-hour-a-day supports. We'll talk a little bit more about the staffing model, but there are at least 4 staff at all times, 2 security and 2 EFRI staff, and at other times there are more than 4. We are opening the building, or the building is open, which is exciting news. It took us a while to get there. There was separate construction going on in the building that was on a slightly different timeline. So EFRI has been operating the program without the building for several months, and we're just open last week, I think it was. So that's a bit of a new part of what we'll be able to do on site, which is really exciting. There's laundry, kitchen area, common space, offices. There's opportunities for outside agencies to meet on site with people who are living in the homes. And the building is entirely for people who are residents of the community. There's no outside services being offered. Next slide, please. So this is the area, if you see at the top, it's under construction. This is from Google Maps when they last took their pictures. But if you look at the bottom sort of triangle just south of Wolf Street, that is where the encampment, you can see the tents that are there. There was approximately 75 people in the encampment when it was in the top in the parking lot where the construction is going on. And so we were able to offer the spot below, and most people moved over very happily, actually. And we had about 55 people move over at that time. So some of the 20 people that didn't transition over, again, the count is always a bit of an estimate. We imagine that some people weren't fully living there, or they decided they didn't want to be part of the encampment any longer at that point in time. So building on a city parking lot did allow us to be slightly to move more quickly because it was our own land. But this process was also facilitated by what was mentioned earlier, which was a state of emergency by the former council. And this allowed us one piece to skip, which is called a record of site condition, which is a provincial requirement for building. And because this project was a homelessness focused project, and that state of emergency was declared, we were able to skip that step. And again, a provincial requirement. So it wasn't skipping our internal processes. It was the province said that because of that state of emergency, we didn't have to complete that. We also did not need building permits for the outside site, and that's because all of the units come with an ESA approval. We purchased our units through Now Housing. That was part of the reason why making that purchase with that approval would allow us to move more quickly. So that's a standardized provincial approval that allowed us to avoid building permits for the outside site. And in fact, that helps explain why the building took a lot longer, because the building was not exempt from the building permit process. We went through all the standard processes, and hence it took a bit longer. We did have to do other processes as well. Obviously, we were able to get support internally to help move them along, but we did do a site plan approval as well as an archaeological assessment, which are all standard processes. So we didn't, other than the provincial record of site condition, we followed all the regular processes that would have to happen to make this happen. Next slide, please. We wanted to share a little bit about the community engagement that we did in the surrounding neighborhood. Also, given that there was a significantly sized encampment in the neighborhood, the neighbors were definitely not happy with the encampment. And so they had organized themselves into sort of an informal neighborhood association. We did not do any formal community consultation, and really the main reason that happened at the time was because of the speed and the need to move ahead with this project, that there was no time for that. But with that said, we did establish a community liaison committee at the direction of council, so that we could incorporate and hear about the experience of being next to the modulars. At the beginning, we really focused on the impacts of the encampment on the neighborhood, which were outside. I mean, the whole project was to help minimize those impacts by helping to provide housing for those individuals. And so we had some debate as to whether or not we should have started the liaison committee after we opened the modulars, but we didn't do that. We started it in the summer, long before it opened, which at the time felt really challenging. But I think in the end, it proved to be the better way for our situation, because it also really helped us to quantify the change for the neighborhood, because they're clearly very frustrated with the impacts of the encampment. And now that we've had those relationships established and we're able to talk about what's the impact of the modulars, we're really able to mark how much the improvement has been for the neighbors. Who are now saying things like, we have our community back, we feel safer, it's cleaner, I don't even notice that the modulars are there, like really positive feedback. We're also doing a bit of a broader evaluation right now with neighbors beyond those who sit on the committee, so that we can get more feedback from other neighbors who would like to let us know how it's been impacting them. Next slide, please.
Great. So in terms of the program structure, one of the challenges of only having a concept plan is that there's a lot of details that need to be figured out once you've gotten that approval. And there were a lot of details that we had to work through, and we had to make numerous pivots along the way. And part of that was also in the design or initial design of the program. So the original intention was to have the city lead the initiative and EFRI would run the program itself. We really wanted to balance the work of the agency supporting the project itself. So figure out how we could leverage city resources to better support EFRI, to better support the project. But as the project unfolded, it became pretty clear that we would have to pivot how we initially designed or were thinking about designing the project. And one of the primary implications for this was just the nature of insurance. I know that sounds like really kind of boring, and insurance, in my personal opinion, is boring, but it does have a lot of significant implications on how you design a project, how we can support each other as both the city and as EFRI as an agency. And so we did have to pivot really quickly, and thankfully had an organization in EFRI who was willing to pivot with us and really able to say yes to pretty much everything that we were asking. And so just want to acknowledge EFRI through that process and everything that Debbie and her team has done, because without that, this project wouldn't even be here today. And so in terms of our program structure, initially, we were kind of thinking the city would be the landlord. That wasn't an option for us, we learned pretty quickly. And so we worked with our local housing corporation, Peterborough Housing Corporation, and Finally Home, so that they could act as the landlord. And part of why, in conversations with EFRI, we also wanted to make a distinction between EFRI as a support agency and EFRI as a landlord. We recognize that there's a power dynamic there, and it can sometimes put an agency in a really uncomfortable position. And so it was really important for us to support EFRI to be the primary support agency, and for us to find an alternative for the landlord to ensure their EFRI's success. In terms of the site operator, as I said, EFRI is a site operator, so they hold the insurance and they're responsible for operating the program and the site. That includes supporting clients on sites, supporting them to sign occupancy agreements, and making sure that folks are participating in the program as a part of that. And the city is the site owner. So again, the city, the project is on a municipal lot. And so individuals are, it's a little bit more complicated kind of in the back end, but essentially they're issued like a license to reside. And so one of the things in terms of why bylaw is attached to that kind of site owner, City of Peterborough site, is it allows us to better support clients if there is an eviction. We can work with our city bylaw officers to better support EFRI and the clients on site without necessarily having to call police. And so we only call police if there's an emergency. And so it also just supports EFRI as a support agency on site. Thank you. So just in terms of site operator consideration, so when we received approval for the concept plan, we were working with a variety of different community partners, pulled them together for meetings to figure out, is this something we should be doing? And if it is, like, is there going to be an agency willing to kind of step up and lead this, recognizing that the city couldn't do that? And we put out a request for expressions of interest to all the community partners, and EFRI was the successful applicant for that. And just in terms of kind of different things that we've been working through is one of the key considerations, I think, is if you're a smaller community, you may have less operators or less choice of operators to work with, or an operator who can take on the liability that may have to be considered as part of this project. Like I said, EFRI has been incredible to work through and support us with that. But I just think if you're a smaller community, those are some pieces to really consider. And our close working relationship. So there's been a willingness and an interest to work in collaboration. We meet with Debbie weekly, and Jess and Debbie and her team are in contact pretty much all day, all the time. And we're always having constant communication and problem solving. One of the key things, though, is we trust their expertise. They are the program operator. We are not there 24/7. We're not micromanaging. We really trust EFRI to do the work, and we're here as a support. So what city resources can we provide to really support EFRI in the success of this project? But also just to make sure that EFRI doesn't feel alone in this, because it is a really large project and there's a lot of attention. And so how do we just support each other through that process? And we're also, I think, all aware that we're learning new things all the time. We don't know the answers for everything. Every day is different. There's a new challenge. We haven't done something like this in our community. And so there's just an open willingness to work together to figure out what those pieces are. And attached to that is a performance measurement plan. So again, the ability to work together to design a plan that helps identify and really figure out what's happening on site and how we can use that in terms of understanding gaps in our systems, where there's strengths in our systems, and how we can better support clients. Next slide.
Okay, so an overview of the service provision part of what we do. Our service provision is guided by trying to meet clients where they are by providing both stability supports and then support to achieve goals. And so just some parts of what the program looks like is there's a daily meal every day provided by an outside agency. It arrives around 4 o'clock every day, and the residents have till midnight to collect a meal. They originally, when we didn't have the building for the first 5 months, the individuals ate in their units. And we delivered meals to their units, but now that we have the building open, people come into the kitchen. That's a picture of our kitchen there and our table where people can eat if they want to socialize and eat together. We have something that's called a care plan. So people are living in the units and occupancy agreements, and an occupancy agreement to have a Residential Tenancy Act exemption requires involvement in a treatment program. And so that program is what we have in our care plan, and our care plans are based loosely on 9 items that we pulled out of the self-sufficiency matrix. And those are things like substance use goals, mental health goals, housing stability, income goals. And each person meets with one of the workers to design their care plan. So they lead their care plan and work with us to decide on what kind of goals they have while they're in the program. And then our workers who are on site 24/7, 2 of them help them to carry out those plans. And each person has a case manager, and that person's goal is to help them work towards whatever plan that they have designed. Within these care plans is a significant link to outside agencies. So for example, if someone has a substance use goal, that could look like connecting with the main substance use provider of services in our town, Forecast, or going to a treatment program that we have. So whatever that looks like, it's connecting them to that service, then also providing services on site. So our staff support 24/7 can look like being involved in resolving disputes. It can be a fast action to mitigate some of the concerns that are coming up. It can be a response to drug poisonings. It can be involved in recreational activities, playing cards with residents overnight, stuff like that. There's support in if people need support to do laundry, support around hoarding or cleanups. Part of the way in which we support residents is also through leading case conferencing, especially if we have a complex case where we're trying to tie in community partners to focus on some more complex needs and how we're going to, as a community, support that person beyond what we do on the site. So that's something that became very clear, is that, you know, beyond the site, we need to conference with other agencies and how we can connect people better in our community. And so there's lots of external referrals where people can get linked into other programs, and that can look like court support programs, cooking programs, anything that is in someone's care plan. And the final part that's here is about the rent. So each resident pays rent. It is the housing portion of either their Ontario Works ODSP, or I probably could get Jocelyn to explain this, about 30% of their income, which is the, yeah. And so that's written into their occupancy agreement as well, what they'll be paying for their rent. And so all of these things are contained within that occupancy agreement and the expectations for residents who reside at the modulars. And I think it goes into the next slide now, more about the agreements. So again, the occupancy agreement requires participation in a care plan. So an individual to reside has to agree to a care plan. It doesn't say what that care plan is. We work on those plans. They're flexible, they're changing, and we're trying to meet people's needs. And they look at any personal goals and shores. We have asked every person to have a housing goal. And so their housing goal could be something as keeping my unit clean, or it could be I'm ready to move into long-term housing. There's a huge continuum there of what a housing goal can look like. And then it's up to them what other parts of goals they want to reach and what they're ready for. One of the things that in the occupancy agreement is that so guests have been a big challenge, and I'll talk a little bit more about that, but one of the things we're working with the residents on is about responsibility for guests. And we have been trying to work collaboratively with the residents to figure out guest policy that works for everybody. And so, but in their care plan, it does state that they are responsible for who they have as guests on the unit. And so I'll talk more about guests after. There's also the site expectations. There's a series of rules that are contained in the occupancy agreement that people need to follow, but they are within the trying to meet people with where they're at. So for example, the occupancy agreement says that you can only have what is in your unit, but that was an incredible challenge when people were moving from the encampment into the site. So at the time when people moved in, people had a lot more belongings. We were flexible in working with, it was hard for people to part with things and only contain everything within their unit. Then over time, we worked out like a site cleaning day. We supported residents to be able to downsize their belongings, to store some of their belongings, to get rid of some of their belongings. And now the site looks quite different than it did 5 months ago. It looks quite lovely. It takes those workers on site 24/7 to continue to work on this pretty much daily to manage the belongings outside of people's units. But there is that is the expectation within the occupancy agreement. And one of the other things about the agreement is, along with those rules, there's many rules that result in warning letters, like, for example, cleaning your unit stuff. But we have had to have a no tolerance for violence. We have had to end people's occupancy for violence against other residents. And that is clearly stated within the occupancy agreement, and obviously part of making this a safe site. Okay, next slide. Oh, still me. Okay. So this is what our staffing model looks like. So as the executive director, I have oversight of the whole operation. So both the service and the site operation, but within, and then the other staff involved from the Elizabeth Fry Society part are sort of what's listed here. So we have a director of operations, and her position is only part-time at this site, but she does it's only part-time at this site. And what she is overseeing is the support for our staff. So anything that has to do with our staff, so like the training, the HR support, all of that is what her position is. We have a data coordinator, and we decided to go this route because we had for a long time a peer support program, and we recognized that many times it was very difficult for our staff to do case notes. And so we went into this program, we created a position of data coordinator. And so what that allows us to do is our staff on site who are busy, there's only 2 of them, 50 residents trying to deal with everything on site. We actually do audio recording of case notes that are sent to our data coordinator, and she manages all the data for the site. So all the case notes, all the feedback about any kind of pertinent issue that we need to be involved with a person or anything like that, it goes through our data coordinator. And then on the site, we have the two support staff who are doing the things that I had mentioned, like mitigating disputes, engaging with residents, and also a site coordinator who's on site mostly during the day. And then we have a cleaner. Obviously, we have an outside cleaner who does our outside washrooms. And then we have an indoor cleaner, and what her role also is engaging with residents, and she has been helping people with the hoarding. So she's actually like also a provider of that peer support and assisting people who may have needs around hoarding. We have a new position of a housing coordinator that is funded externally. So very quickly we knew that in order to be able to move people into other housing options, we needed another role, and that person is funded by United Way Reaching Home Grant, who then helps with those long-term housing options, but they're on EFRI staff. We have also a site manager or a manager of all the client services. So she oversees all those care plans and all of the staff on the daily operations. And then we have a maintenance coordinator who is attending to all the like damages and repairs and everything that's going on the site. And then of course a security team, which is an outside agency that provides services along with our staff. And just to mention too, this is the sort of EFRI side of what's happening in terms of services and site, but we also, because of the complex needs of those who struggle with chronic homelessness, we do have a full community support. So I'll talk a little bit about how those tie in later, but we come from a model of, we don't believe in the idea of duplication of service or service overlaps. We look at adapting and bringing in as many services as a person needs to be able to have them meet the goals that they want. And so this is a real collaborative approach. Most of our residents, I would say there's probably nobody who has no other supports. Most of our residents have additional supports from other agencies. And we have in the building a shared interview space where other agencies can book time and come in and meet with the people who they're providing service to. So like, for example, CMHA and all of those things, all of those services can come onto the site and work with the people they're working with. Okay, next slide.
So tenant selection, obviously, we prioritized people from the encampment because this was an initial response. And really, I think the main thing to recognize or to share at this for this part of the presentation is that this is intended to be an entry point into the housing system for individuals whose needs are not being met in other places. And so, you know, we had people who said they weren't initially interested in this type of housing, and now those folks who at the beginning weren't interested are coming back and saying that now they would like to be considered for this. So originally it was a group of outreach agencies who helped to prioritize who was able to get a unit, and we're moving towards using a matrix model, which will, I think improve the way we move forward. Next slide. We wanted to share some of the successes, one of which is the site stabilization. So we looked at the data from a year previous. We pulled the data in the first 10 weeks of the program. And this is particularly relevant because we moved people in very quickly. This is beyond recommended best practice. And there were a lot of reasons for why that happened. One of which is it was really cold at the end of November. There was actually a cold period in the winter this winter, and it happened to be right then. And so we decided to push the move-in speed much more quickly than what we would have normally wanted to do. But even within those first 10 weeks, which we were expecting to be sort of the time where stabilization might not be occurring just yet. Whereas in fact, during those first 10 weeks, there were only 4 calls for emergency services for inside our community. And when we compared this to the data from a year previous where the encampment was, so this is the exact same location, there were actually 42 calls for police services during that exact same 10-week period a year previous. So for us, this really highlights that the program, even in those initial transition period, during the initial transition period, it was already providing a level of stability that we were nowhere near to in the encampment. Next slide. I'll just highlight this on the slide. I think I already shared, though, that the neighborhood is seeing some really significant changes in a way that they're really pleased about. And we're hoping we'll roll this up and share that on our website at some point to be able to share more publicly in terms of the impacts and the quotes that we're getting from neighbors, because I know that this is an important thing that would be helpful to other communities as well. Next slide.
So just to talk a little bit about the successes that we've seen. So initially the stabilization period took a little bit longer because we were moving people in at such a quick rate. We had this beautiful view that we'd move 5 people in at a time. But in 3 days with terrible weather, we moved 33 residents in. And so stabilizing a great number at once took a little bit more work. But now we sort of look at the first 30 days is the period of stability. And then we have the care plan enacted within 30 days. But what we noticed really quickly, and we were surprised how quickly this change was seen in the residents, is that people were reporting significant mental health improvements very quickly. And we were hearing feedback from other communities, work with people, our own staff, residents were just feeling very quickly a significant increase in health. We've also seen a lot of other successes for individuals who reconnect with family. We already mentioned there were 4 people who found employment very quickly when we moved in and continue those employment endeavors. One of our residents is employed full time. And some of when we talk about the being client-centered, some of those things support around were the needs to remove the barriers that were preventing him from being employed. And so trying to help him be more successful in being able to take those employment opportunities. I think next slide. Oh, okay. Let me just say one more thing about success that I thought was on the next slide, but just one more thing about Also, I just want to talk about the housing readiness. So one of the things the new housing workers are working on is creating a plan. We recognize that we already have a number of individuals who are able to move into more stable housing opportunities. And so, as we know, with a bit of a housing crisis, it's hard sometimes to find those opportunities. So they're working to try to help people move into other options. And, you know, we have our first resident moving into a long-term housing situation on May 1st. And, you know, this is an individual who was 2 years in the encampment and then 6 months in the modulars, and now has a lease signed for May 1st. And we actually have several others who are in that readiness part, and we're just trying to find the opportunities. We've made some applications, and we're looking at moving some people into other housing opportunities to allow for other people to move in. So there's been some successes there already with the stability that we're seeing in the program. Okay, now next slide, sorry. Okay, one of the biggest challenges I mentioned earlier was the guests. So the guests are a challenge because they don't have an occupancy agreement signed, so they don't owe you anything when they're on the site. And so it has been a real challenge to manage guests. We do have a trespass list, but we try to keep it as small as we can. But it kind of mirrors what we do with guest removal. So zero tolerance for physical violence seems to be at the top of that. Reason to be trespassed or what we try to use are 24 to 48-hour bans when we can. And what we had sort of started with is we had visiting hours from 9 in the morning till 10 at night, and then trying to remove guests at 10 o'clock at night. And we faced a lot of challenges with that as well. So we're just changing that model, and we're changing to a model where again, so the occupants are having more empowerment around who visits them. And that's a good skill to have when you move into other housing, is they're identifying a list of who their guests are. And those are the guests that are allowed on site, and they identify when they want guests, and we support them in developing the skills to be able to manage their guests. Okay, the next one are the couples, which have also been a challenge. Especially those who have complex communication concerns, they can cause a lot of challenges for the site. Often we have to mitigate these with high staff involvement. And there's been especially if you have a relationship that's abusive in nature, we do try to teach the skills of verbal de-escalation. Initially, we went in with couples each having their own unit in case the relationship broke down, and then they would each still have their own unit. We have the challenge with that, and it is kind of the current policy, is that we have some units being used entirely as storage and 2 people living together in one. And so then the question of should we have these units for storage or freed up for somebody else? And there's just been a lot of reasons why we sort of have stopped taking couples. Initially, when we moved people in, we tried to move in the 2 people in a couple so that it would make it easier. But we're just at this point focusing and trying to have people focus more on their own goals and their own needs to be successful. So the next slide. So the complex needs on the site are the other thing to consider. There's various mental health challenges, substance use challenges, and also those co-occurring complexities. So one of the biggest difficulties has been the substance use psychosis, or psychosis in general, and trying to create plans around people who experience psychosis so that they don't lose their occupancy. So in what ways can we engage sooner to make sure that that doesn't happen? There's also some challenges around hoarding, stealing, and violence. Again, our staff support clients to verbally de-escalate when possible, and try to teach those skills for people. And the next one. Next slide. Okay, and just the last one. I just wanted to, just in terms of us managing the needs on the site, I saw that Better Street joined, and I wanted to mention that Better Street, who provides support to people, to programs like ours, has been a significant trainer for our staff. Like as we came on, the person who runs Better Street was involved in the Better Tent City and also Herb Street, and sort of had our staff, guiding our staff about how we would manage these challenges. And then have continued to be supporters of us as we got the site undergoing. And then also more recently came to do a training that was specifically towards how we would have security and our staff work better together. So they've been a significant provider of the support in how we created this site. Okay. So am I also doing the next steps enhancing the site? Yes. Okay. Just keep right on talking. So as we had mentioned, is we just recently opened the building. And so we have plans for a number of services in the building. Some have already occurred and will continue to occur. So like, for example, we've already had a tax clinic. We have a clinic for people to learn how to use computers. We have all kinds of groups that happen there and one-to-one counseling. So another part of eFry is our programs come down there to provide this kind of programming. We have specific cultural programs. We have, again, through that United Way Reaching Home grant, we have an Indigenous Partnerships Coordinator. And so she is running some cultural programs down there, like drumming circles, making dream catchers. We just, with one of our community partners, we just created a cooking program where we're going to be cooking traditional foods and bringing them to the site. We have ID clinics, all of those kinds of things that will be happening in the building. Heading into summer, we're looking at what we could do in terms of gardens and outdoor activities and having the residents have more to do in those areas. We're moving into a work program process as well, where we're going to be transferring some of the cleaning duties over to the residents who will be paid employment. And that will be a more formal employment program that we should have ready to go next week. And no, not next week, next month. And then, but informally, we've already done some work programming where we've hired residents instead of, like, for example, movers when we open the building and those kinds of things. And we have a lot of interest in some art projects. We have some community members who want to be involved. And I don't know if I could speak to it, but we do have a big art project coming that's by an outside funder to beautify the site as well. Next slide. Okay, next steps.
And as you can see, that this program is continuing to change and we're adapting. So some of that is, I mean, the evaluation, the formative evaluation pieces are sometimes informal as well, as we talk through some of the situations as they arise. But we will be documenting all of that. And then there will be a summative evaluation to be looking at whether or not this project is meeting its needs. And then within that, continuing to share the results as well as learn from others. I mean, we're here today because we feel like we'd like to share, and there's lots of interest in what we've learned. And then as other sites are being developed across the province and the ones that do exist, we are keen to connect and to learn from their experience as well, so that we can be doing what we're doing as best we can. Next step, or next slide. And then another significant part of my role is the planning for after 2025, because this project has been approved on a 2-year timeline. So that means that technically we will be allowed for sure to operate this until November 2025, and we need to look to what comes after that. It will be dependent on funding and council approval, as well as the success of the project. So we're working toward that date as to whether or not we continue with the same model. Is there an adaptation, or what? There's many options that could come after this time frame. Next slide.
Yeah, and part of this is also looking at our local system and our housing continuum, we see Wolf Street as an opportunity to understand where the gaps in our system are, but also what gap is Wolf Street filling in a different way as well. What we're also trying to do is leverage existing resources that we have in the community. So our housing department is actually on the same floor as us. I know that's not the same for lots of other municipalities. And so we're able to easily connect with our housing department and leverage rent ups, leverage opportunities with potential vacancies that might be coming up. And if we have the money for supports, how do we kind of leverage and maximize those resources that we have? We're also connecting with all of our existing agencies who participate in coordinated access and leveraging our internal transfer tables so that if a vacancy becomes available in a program that has less supports, are we able to move someone from Wolf Street into that program and then kind of continue along that continuum? And so we're really trying to leverage those opportunities where possible, and constantly trying to find new ways to get any kind of funding where possible to kind of build onto the programming or build into the system of support as we're continuing with this project. And that was a lot of information. I appreciate everyone's time. We really wanted to take the opportunity, though, to really share the scope of the project, from a how did we get here, but also provide Debbie the opportunity to really provide information about how the program works, some of the challenges that they're facing on a daily basis. Our contact information is there. There's a QR code which takes you to what we've called Connect Peterborough page, which has all of our information on it, which includes the original report we went to council with, the concept report. It includes a separate one we just went to council in March, which has some more updated information, including budget and ongoing expected costs and successes or initial successes and things we're looking at for the project. And so I encourage you to look at the Connect Peterborough page, and then obviously reach out if anyone has any specific questions for anyone, but just wanted to say thank you for the opportunity to share this, and open to any questions that anyone might have.
Amazing. Well, I just wanted to take the opportunity to thank all three of you, Debbie, Jocelyn, and Jessica, for sharing, for giving so much information and being vulnerable and sharing your learnings as well, and where you maybe would have done a few things a little bit differently. So appreciate all of this. I'm going to pull up the chat right now. We've got about 15 minutes for questions. And I know that there have been some questions coming through. I also see a hand up as well. I believe that's Liz. So as I'm going through the chat, Liz, do you want to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Yeah, sure. Thanks so much. Gosh, what a lot of information. It's incredible. You've done such incredible work in a short period of time. That's fabulous. My question is, I missed the very beginning. So I guess it's Jocelyn and Claire. Is that you guys up there that I see?
So I'm Jocelyn. I'm the homelessness and program manager at Social Services.
Yep.
And
I'm Jessica. Claire
Jessica.
was originally the staff member from EFRI who was going to be presenting, but Debbie's here today in her place.
I got it. Okay. So my question is, did this, like the initial, sort of let's get going, come from the city? Was it the city?
I think it was probably a variety of different things. I think that there was some recognition around the encampment. We'd had an encampment for 2 years, like quite a significant one in a community of our size, and recognized that we needed to do something different. We were really lucky to receive the increased provincial funding. And so we saw that as an opportunity to take a second. We consulted with our community partners. So we had a few different meetings where we brought a bunch of people to the table and said, okay, we have some provincial funding. This is one idea, but let's see what everyone else has on the table. Also recognizing that whatever we did forward, specifically if we did modular, the city would play a role in it, but we couldn't operate it. And so we didn't want to go forward to council on an approval with a plan that we didn't have community support for. And so we were able to build that kind of community support. Community partners very graciously also provided their support in our council reports. So we were able to go to council and say we had community support for this, which was hugely successful.
Yep.
And then we were able to, once we received support, bring that community table back together, brainstorm a few plans, and then EFRI was the successful applicant for the expression of interest and worked closely with EFRI. But I would say throughout the whole process, we worked really closely with community partners, specifically
Right.
the outreach teams, because they had a lot of expertise. They'd been supporting clients at the encampment for the last 2 years. And so that really informed either the design of the project or how we would support folks to move from the current encampment site to the sanctioned encampment site. So it was a variety of different things, but it wasn't the city alone. We had a large community support for the project.
Great. Yeah, that's fabulous. That's really clear. And I'm just curious about the operations funding. So I imagine there's a bunch of different pots, but when you talk about 2 years approval, is that city approval?
Yeah, so the funding is HPP, homelessness prevention funding. And so we received that increased allocation. So this project, that HPP does cover another project as well, but the sole source of that Wolf Street is from HPP funding. The approval for the project is from council. So we received approval from council to be on site at Wolf Street for 2 years. And so that's also part of Jess's role, is moving forward. And yeah.
And like
Thank you.
I'm just gonna chime in for 2 seconds. Like the real origin story of this is that we had an encampment and there was no real solution being pitched. And me and Keith and Sheldon Laidman and Jocelyn were having these meetings all the time trying to form a solution. And there was all this static and noise from groups trying to piecemeal some sort of like modular thing or like tiny homes. And it was all happening in the periphery of what we were talking about. And I remember so clearly Sheldon, who runs everything, he was getting up to leave to I think he was going to see one of these people that had this big dorm style modular thing happening. And I said, Sheldon, when are we ever going to talk about this at this table? And he goes, well, Alex, like, where are we going to put it? And I said, put it at Wolf Street, right? And Keith, who's here, Keith just about fell out of his chair. But when he got up, his eyes were kind of glazed over and he was like, that just could work, right? And that was the start of us really considering this like internally, as opposed to just being like pitched these sort of like piecemeal versions of Wolf Street externally, right? And then also like how Jocelyn mentioned, a huge part of that funding, we also supported a barrier-free drop-in style shelter. That is also like hugely a part of this, right? Because a lot of the work that went in initially was like triaging the site. So like determining who at the encampment has actually been there living rough for the longest, who has shelter space or is living like couch surfing and just access, like hanging out at the encampment. So kind of separating those things, and the barrier free, like the drop-in shelter that was established, like also helps with the issue of the encampment, right? Because it gives people a different sort of accessible shelter, which is what people needed.
Thank you so much for that question and for the answers as well. There's a couple hands. I just wanted to highlight, there's a few folks that are asking about policies, care plans, budget. Can I assume if they look at this QR code and use their phone on this website, they could potentially access this? And I know Ariel, shout out to Ariel, is also pushing some links in the chat of local documents. Do those links contain what folks are looking for in terms of policies, occupancy agreements?
The main policy that we have written up in a way that we would be able to share is a version of our occupancy agreement, which isn't posted, but if people want to reach out to me, I can share that document with them. We'd be happy to share that. Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, I think the next hand up was Gregory. So if you want to unmute yourself, Gregory.
Hi, thank you. And first off, just want to say great presentation. It's a wealth of information that you've been able to provide this team, and it's greatly appreciated by myself. To get right to, I guess my question would be for a municipality that is considering this. I guess what would be, you noted like from the building department that because these cabins were ESA approved, that the building department didn't really have an issue with it. But I was wondering if building or fire had any other conditions or provisions that were required as part of this site. and now also having lived the program and the property for a number of months, if you, from a lessons learned approach, if there's anything else that you could do or change, what would it be at this point in time from a built environment approach?
So we definitely had fire involved in the design in terms of the spacing of the units and based on the fit of the units themselves. There was also, if you can remember the overall site view, and all the units are sort of on one side. That was also because we were building in a floodplain, and so that's why they're sort of squished. We weren't, even though the site is quite a lot larger than where the units are, we had to put them all together, and so we worked with fire in order to ensure that that met their requirements.
I think just to attach to that, we had, so Amelie was our kind of lead at the building department. She handled all the design, but we had lots of collaborative meetings to make sure that what our expertise from a program lens would inform the design. And then where we also recognized where there was some design limitations, how could we work through that? So for example, the floodplain piece, some of it was, okay, how do we support the site? From a fire perspective, we know we needed like a laneway large enough for a fire truck to be able to go in and out of the site. In terms of design of the units, from an expertise perspective, in terms of supporting folks, we didn't want to have too large of a space between units because we were concerned around accumulation of belongings. So there were lots of meetings where Amelie was able to talk about the design requirements and the site requirements from a building perspective, and we were able to provide our expertise and really try to work through some of those things. So I'd encourage those meetings really early on to help inform the design process and the site process, recognizing that from a building perspective, there's just some things you just kind of have to do. But Amelie's expertise was hugely crucial to the success of the project, and also she was the liaison. She handled all things to do with building. To be honest, I couldn't really tell you a whole lot because she just kind of managed it, which was really great. In terms of the design site, I don't know, Debbie, I mean, you're there 24/7, or your staff are. Is there anything in terms of the site design that you might want to change moving forward or suggest for folks on the call?
I mean, I guess it's going to take a bit more time for me to answer that question because we have been operating in a significant deficit without a building from the beginning, and that meant over winter our staff were working outside. We did keep a unit available for staff to warm up. So I mean, I guess the thing is that you need to have flexibility to operate one of these because, you know, all of those challenges that we're like, are we going to not open or are we going to pivot and figure something out? And so we figured that's what we did. So I think the challenges, they'll become more evident now that we're fully operational, and that building just opened last week. I just wanted to say something about the occupancy agreements too, just to sort of say where they originated, is that EFRI had a small housing program, and that's how we operated with these occupancy agreements, where we would sign the lease and the occupants come in, and that allowed us that RTA exemption. And so when we went into this process, we hired that lawyer back to look at all the facets of what a modular community would entail in these sort of residential tenancy occupancy. So what if we want to take a look at our agreement, it is based on that lawyer having done the research and the background of how you would get the Residential Tenancy Act exemption and all of the components that have to exist in that. And that comes from all of right to the place of, if you terminate someone's occupancy, how do you support them when they leave? There has to be a component in this kind of occupancy agreement that you're not going to just kick someone out and then not offer them supports. And so that has to be written right out into the occupancy agreements, and all of the things that are in those agreements is based on what we needed to include to make this work and have those exemptions. And I'm just going to answer one more question since I already have the mic. I just keep seeing someone post up how many staff ratio there. And just to say, like, we have the minimum of 2 EFRI staff on site. So there's 50 residents, so that's 25 residents per person technically. However, during the day, that's when our coordinators are there. And in the evening was a time that we found quite difficult to manage when people were coming back from being out during the day and stuff. So we actually most often have a third staff in the evening hours, so that 4 to 12 shift. And then overnight, two staff is quite sufficient. I thought we'd need more staff overnight. We don't. 2 is a very sufficient model for the overnight. And when I say 2, that's our part, where there's always 2 security staff as well. So it's actually 4 people on site. Okay, I'll leave it now for other questions.
Okay, thank you for jumping in there. That was going to be my next one. So thank you for answering that one. I'm scrolling through the chat. I can see that Rebecca and Ariel are answering questions as well for folks. And I know Marie has summarized some questions and then put the answer in there just in case you missed it. So make sure that you're going through the chat. Scrolling through it, I'm not seeing any others that haven't been answered through the chat or, oh, I'm now seeing a hand up. Jen, you've
Hi.
got 2 minutes.
Okay, real quick. Actually, I did put a question in there that I don't think was answered, unless my mind drifted for a minute. So if you guys were using dollars from the HPP program, did that cut into the amount you were able to use for your community for things like first month's rent, last month's rent, arrears, all of those things so that they could remain housed or get housed?
Peterborough was really lucky to receive that 2.5 in addition to our regular HPP funding. So we built our budget based on that additional funding. And so we don't have to go into our other kind of HPP programming, which we do use to cover things like last month's rent, first month's rent, arrears for some of those pieces. We do have some of that HPP allocated, our original HPP allocation, to be able to better support folks moving from Wall Street into other units. So to provide them with first month's rent, last month's rent, furniture costs, those sorts of things. But we didn't see a decrease in our existing budget because we were able to use the additional funding within the budget.
And how did you guys get that additional funding? Did you put in a proposal for that, or do you know?
I don't think we did. I think it was just an allocation announcement. Rebecca, yeah, sorry, I wasn't in this role at that point. Yeah. So, well, it just started. So Rebecca might be able to better answer that question.
Yeah, okay. That's okay. It was a bit of a surprise to a lot of communities. We were told it was based on like our stats, and we had been asked to sort of compile statistics related to our chronic homeless population and the needs in our community. Most got a fairly hefty bump, but not all communities did. So I wish I could give you a really clear answer, but that is basically it.
Okay, well, thank you.
Okay. Well, folks, we are 2 minutes to the hour, depending on your time zone, but in mine, it's 2 minutes to the hour. So we are going to wrap things up. Again, I just wanted to say a big thank you to Jocelyn, to Jessica, to Debbie, and to the whole team. I know it's 3 of you on the call, but you are representing a large team that is working on this project, and I've worked to the development, the implementation, and then the ongoing evaluation. So thank you so much for sharing. Just as a reminder to folks, I'm gonna move the slides along quickly here, that you can access resources along housing-focused sheltering and access pages like the Canadian Shelter Transformation Network. And this is also where all of the recordings and slides will be posted under resources on our Built for Zero Canada webpage. I also wanted to remind folks, if you didn't see, or you did see and you forgot to register, we have a webinar coming up next Monday, April the 22nd. We are going to be joined by Ian DeYoung from OrgCode for a webinar to discuss how to end homelessness for people living in encampments using housing-focused and person-centered approaches. This is a webinar series that is aimed at those working in communities to resolve encampments and support people living in encampments transitioning to housing. So you're not going to want to miss this. I believe Maria is going to push the link out in the chat if you haven't yet registered, and the recording will also be available afterwards. We also wanted to highlight, this was in our newsletter as well, that there is a training being hosted out of London, Ontario, that folks might be interested in. The organizers are Street Level Women at Risk, and they are doing a training focused on maintenance for housing workers. So an immersive experience designed to provide the fundamental skills needed to maintain a unit and create positive landlord and client experiences. It's a webinar crafted specifically for practitioners who provide in-home support to individuals experiencing homelessness. It's going to be packed with actionable know-how tips and what you need to thrive in your role. So if you think this is something that would be of interest to yourself or anyone you're working with, then please pass on the details. And I also believe Marie is going to push that link out for you in the chat. Okay, folks, thank you again for signing on. We hope you all have a great rest of your day, a great weekend, and we will chat soon. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.